Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. So, I've been reading quite a bit of horror recently as we approach Halloween, especially classic and vintage horror. And among the things that I've read, these are the last three books: The Furies, The Rats, and The Cats. So all three of these books share a common theme. They're all sci-fi horror creature features. And they all feature a particular species of animal that gets grotesquely transformed into ferocious killers. And they attack humanity en masse, causing all kinds of chaos and mayhem and bloodshed. It's a terrifying premise in any case, but let's see how these three books compare. Starting off with The Furies by Keith Roberts. This is the first book I read among these. This book was published in 1966. And this story features an invasion of giant killer wasps that wreak terror and mayhem in the English countryside in rural southwest England, which is a lovely part of the world in normal times, but these are not at all normal times. Not only do we have these giant wasps everywhere, but the landscape itself has been devastated by nuclear fallout. Following the detonation of offshore test bombs by both the Americans and the Soviets on the same day. And these test bombs clearly went totally wrong because they led to planet-shattering earthquakes across the globe. So we've got these two major catastrophes going on. These earthquakes across the globe and invasion of giant wasps, which seems a little bit of an implausible setup to me. I'm not quite sure what the point of the fusion bomb plot really was, other than to give the story a post-apocalyptic flavour. I'm assuming Roberts was trying to go for a kind of Day of the Triffids feel. Anyway, after most of the population, at least in England, because that's the only society that we really know about, has been wiped out, right? Most of the population has been wiped out by earthquakes. As if that wasn't bad enough, these swarms of 3-foot long wasps move in and they start harassing and killing survivors. But they're not just mindless killers. These creatures show a remarkable level of intelligence and group coordination as well. They proceed to terraform Earth's landscape into a vast network of giant wasps' nests. And in doing so, they even manage to co-opt and enslave some human workers to help build and manage these nests. So they don't kill everyone. So our protagonist in the story is a man called Bill and his dog Sec, as he sets out of his ruined home to find other survivors, take refuge, and eventually coordinate some kind of resistance against these wasps. So I enjoyed this book on the whole. Roberts is very good at building tension and horror. Just the notion of these giant killer wasps alone is pretty terrifying for me because I have a phobia of wasps. But the thing is, the way these creatures are described, their behaviour, their remarkable intelligence, and their huge colonies of nests is very compelling. And it's extremely horrific. I can't think of any more sort of dreadful threats to one's life than being stung to death by a giant wasp. So, as a horror premise, I think it works really well. But, as horrible as it is, the violence never really felt gratuitous. It doesn't need to be. You can imagine the horror of it without it needing to be spelled out to you. So I think this is a great sci-fi horror novel in that respect, but it's not a perfectly written novel. The pacing of the plot felt a bit uneven. It felt quite meandering at times. And the final resolution was not very satisfying for me. It felt a bit too convenient. And what's more, I don't think enough explanation was given to the origin story of the Furies, which is another name for the Wasps, or their motivation for invasion and taking over our planet, basically. So this is an interesting sci-fi premise behind it all, but the author doesn't go into very much detail, and I think he really raises more questions than answers. So, all in all, it's a decent sci-fi horror novel. The premise is amazing. The horror is very well done, but there are a few flaws in its execution. So I give The Furies 3 stars. Next up, The Rats by James Herbert, published in 1974. This is by far the most well-known among these 3 books. And this book was incredibly influential in this kind of animal attack subgenre of pulp horror in its heyday in the 1970s and 80s. And there is more emphasis on the horror and the kind of the violence of this invasion compared to the Furies. And you will see that this was the case for many of the books that this novel inspired afterwards. So the premise is very simple. The East End of London gets infested with a mutant strain of oversized giant black rats. And these animals are carnivorous and extremely aggressive and violent towards humans and other animals. And they cause terror, murder, and mayhem wherever they go and wherever they come into contact with people. They tear their victims apart with grisly violence. Even if you manage to fight off or escape these creatures, if you just suffer a single bite from one of these rats, you are still doomed because they infect their victims with a disease that is always fatal within 24 hours. So, as you can imagine, these rats are not just dangerous and terrifying, but they're also an existential threat to Londoners and the city as a whole, as these rats continue to breed and expand and colonize different areas and attack more groups of people. In this story, we follow an art teacher called Harris as he works with the authorities trying to find a solution to control this problem. And this narrative is interspersed with various vignettes. During these little episodes, a character gets introduced in a new setting. We learn a bit about them and their life, and then usually within the same chapter, they suffer a terrible fate at the hands of the rats, and that's the last we see of them. So it gives the story quite an interesting sort of structure. We get some interesting location choices along the way in which these events unfold. So this could be, for example, in an underground train or in a zoo. And these outbreaks that we witness are very intense and horrific scenes. It's bloody, it's violent, and it's gruesome. So this book does require a bit of a strong stomach. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But for what it's worth, I think it's a very entertaining and well-paced piece of horror fiction. It's also laden with social commentary, as working class communities bear the brunt of this plague. Their communities ripe for vermin infestation after generations of neglect by the authorities and poor sanitary conditions. And this is coupled with a government that is slow to respond to the crisis, and totally out of its depth. I think this story gives it an extra layer of depth and satire even to think about. Altogether, a solid and skillfully written horror novel. Not one of my all-time favourite horror novels, but it is very good for what it is. I give The Rats 4 stars. I recently discussed this book as a buddy read with Ira from SF Words of Wonder, so do check out that video if you're interested to learn more. I'll link it in the video description. Now, as I said, The Rats inspired many animal attack horror novels in the 70s that followed its success with a similar premise. One of these is The Cats by Nick Sharman, published in 1977. This is the next book that I read. As a cat lover, I was very intrigued. And in fact, you can even see it says on the cover, in the tradition of the rats. So its inspiration is kind of explicit. Yeah. So yeah, as a cat lover, I was intrigued by this premise. Unfortunately, the quality of writing was a big step down for this one. This one is also set in London, and this novel explores the disastrous consequences of dangerous experiments into biological warfare, involving a volatile bacteria tested on cats, which, when subjected to heat, it triggers an insane, violent frenzy in these animals. So a series of implausible events unfolds which lead to these cats being released from their lab, and they go out on a rampage, infecting other cats and attacking and killing Londoners left, right and centre. This disease also seems to affect the social behaviour of the cats, which of course, as we all know, are mainly solitary animals. The infected cats congregate into bloodthirsty packs, which display remarkable group coordination out on the rampage on the streets of London, leaving chaos and carnage in their wake. It's a ridiculous premise. If I compare this to The Rats and the Furies, I mean, I can somehow picture malevolent hordes of rats or wasps attacking humans en masse, right? And I think this is because these animals sort of invoke unpleasant or sinister connotations in real life, right? Whether that's justified or not. But rats and wasps, to me, feel plausible in a strange kind of way and at home in a sci-fi horror setting. But gangs of cats attacking people just seems kind of silly to me. And the fact is that the military ends up getting drafted to fight these animals, and even they struggle against them. It's absurd. And that is to say nothing of the characters in this novel, who are entirely one-dimensional and forgettable. So much so that I was actually rooting for the cats to kill them off whenever possible. So I'm not going to go into detail about the characters here. This is obviously not a book to take seriously. It's not terrible. It's still quite enjoyable, and it has its moments. And obviously it's going to have a kind of trashy, pulpy appeal. But it's as a novel, as a piece of fiction, it's nowhere near as well crafted or consistently entertaining as The Rats, from which it's clearly a derivative. So I give The Cats 2 stars. The literary merit is low, but it may still be worth checking out if you're a pulp horror fan. So that completes my recent Animal Attack horror reading spate. I enjoyed all of these to some extent at least, but The Rats definitely comes out on top as a clear recommendation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.